welcoming community there is. And it's just part of our DNA. It hasn't changed for me for 40 years, and I don't think that's ever going to change. And all of us know we owe tremendous kudos to the founders and the very early members of the shul. I can't imagine the guts it must have taken to start a shul from scratch. We are forever indebted to the Glaziers, the Solomons, the Palmers, the Ritholtzes, and so many others. But I also know, besides the founding 10 or 11 families, the guts it took for so many others, the next wave before we came in, who came mostly from established Orthodox communities and Queens and Brooklyn, to move here with either one or two little children or no children as yet, and come here to Plainview and say, I believe there's going to be an established Orthodox community, and I am going to make a home for my children here. When we came in that first Shabbos, the shul was really quite a surprise. The sanctuary was about maybe half the size of the current base medrash. It had very low cross beams. It had these very thick columns that obstructed the view from the women's section. Had no room, barely any room for a kiddush, no youth rooms, but there was a heck of a lot of ruach in the midst. Every member did something. Everybody either chaired a committee or worked on a committee, came to numerous events. We did art auctions. We did bazaars. We raised money together. And we just had a lot of fun doing so. And our families and our kids grew very tight, and they remained that way. And for Debbie and I, that's something we're just so proud of. We love to see all of our friends' kids and how they've grown up and what mensches they always were, but what real mensches they've all become. My friend Yossi Wellfeld asked me to join his one-person strategic planning committee to plan for the future. He had spreadsheets with assumptions that will grow by 3 families a year for 5 years. But a lot of the original founders felt that's ridiculous. That's way too aggressive. And anytime expansion came up at a general congregation meeting, we discussed it, but it pretty much got tabled. But we were growing slowly but steadily. And at that point, we made what I believe was our first major milestone decision in hiring Rabbi Moshe Portnoy, Zichrono Tzaddik Livracha, to be our rabbi. Rabbi Portnoy brought to us much needed legitimacy within the Orthodox world. Everybody in the Orthodox world knew him, everybody respected him, and he brought unparalleled warmth and humanity that touched so many of us. He was also the driving force behind the mikvah and a major driving force for our new shul as well. And as the young Israel moved into the early and then mid-90s, talk of expansion got more serious. We had already squared off the original house. We added several rows. We added the upstairs level, and we bought the house next door, the Blue House, as we called it, where our youth directors have lived for close to 20 years now. There were 2 years, I checked the records a few months ago, where 8 families moved in and then 9 families moved in. And one person who was on our expansion committee later on said to me, how can I make a bar mitzvah here? My father's going to kill me. And the time had come. Larry Cohen was president of the shul, and he took a very aggressive stance for expansion. We focused on what we really needed to have and not all the other things that would have been nice to have, but we knew we couldn't afford and would never pass a shul vote. Gary Katz ran a lot of financial projections for us, and we made the deal internally. We had a $1 million budget. We said we're not going to exceed it by even $1. We had an assessment that passed. We secured a mortgage, and we created a special funds gift target, a target of $100,000, which several early members didn't think was achievable. We got laughed out with that, but at the end of the day, from within the shul community, we ended up raising over $600,000. I think the largest gift was $25,000. And I took that as a sign that the community really wanted this to happen. The vote happened. it passed 91-7, and we knew we were finally on our way. We hired a young architect from Manhattan who had great vision. He built a little scale model for us, Alex Borland, and we had a large planning committee to start, but when we went into detailed design, it came down to a core four. Sorry, David, that's not any Yankee or Met joke. Of Rhonda and Brian Burns and Alvin and myself. And then all the construction bids came in at 1.3 and 1.4 million and higher, and we were devastated. But then Alvin, in a closed-door committee meeting with our architect, read our architect the Riot Act, as we know that only Alvin can do. And Alex made modifications, and the project came in at just a hair under 1 million. And Alvin, you saved that project, our new building, right then and there. And for so many years, for the decades that you've been here, you've been a dedicated and tireless member of our shul. We all owe you a huge debt of thanks for being indispensable through the years. Thank you, Al. The new shul opened on Rosh Hashanah 2000. Steve Nachman was president. We entered the shul right behind Rabbi Portnoy. I entered the shul right behind Rabbi Portnoy and Steve. We were all carrying a Sefer Torah, and it was exhilarating. I don't think there was a single person in the shul who wasn't proud of what we collectively, about 100 members at the time, had accomplished. And anytime I've had an opportunity to see one of the early members come in who had moved away from Plainview for whatever reasons, and they took a look at what we had accomplished, both physically and spiritually as a community, and have them look around in disbelief, it's made me feel so great, and I'm sure everybody else as well. Rabbi Portnoy was with us for several years in the new shul. He took such tremendous pride in it every day. He would go outside as construction was going on, right after Shacharis. He'd schmooze with the construction workers and with the fabulous construction manager we had, Anthony Testa. He laid one of the stones in the sanctuary. He insisted on the Aron Kodesh having 12 to 14 Sifrei Torah. And I'd look at him and he'd say, don't worry, Marty, one day we're gonna have a need for that many Sifrei Torah. And sure enough, we have the Holocaust Torah, the Katzes and the Cohns and others have dedicated Torahs to our congregation. Rabbi Portnoy's illness was felt throughout our midst. We started interviewing for what we felt was going to be an assistant rabbi position. Lou Soroka was the chairman of that committee. Actually, Lou and Jerry Gross were the co-chairman, and we started interviewing candidates while Rabbi Portnoy was still with us, and we had every expectation that he was going to still be with us. But ultimately, we came to the realization that we were interviewing for our eventual Rav. And this was a very difficult realization for so many of us to accept. And I give great credit to Lou and to Jerry and the others on the committee and how they acted and served the community's needs while also maintaining deep respect for the Portnoy family as we continued our search. And we all know we owe a great debt of gratitude for the Portnoy family and for Rabbi Portnoy for keeping us on the road, and for Rabbi Portnoy being our mentor and friend and personal confidant for 20 years, for over 20 years. And we are thankful, Shelley, that you have stayed with us as a beloved part of our community for all these years. Both you and your wonderful family, who we're all very close to, you have been an inspiration to all of us. Rabbi Weissman, for the last 15 years, has brought us incredible energy and insight and Ahavat Yisrael well beyond his years. For the Portnoy family, as we continue. I think we also. And for Rabbi and personal confidant, part of our community, very close to Rabbi. I'm getting feedback on.
Marty, go ahead and Marty, just unmute yourself again? Sorry.
Good.
Go ahead.
Okay. So I think we all saw that from Rabbi Weissman from the moment we met him. Certainly for those of us who met him in my house on his interview when he blew us away, for those of us who heard him speak in the shul on his interview Shabbos when he blew everybody away with his drasha, his ease, and just the way he had about him. And I know, Rabbi, you were only 27 years old at the time. I couldn't believe that anybody could have that polish and smarts. And we see it every time we're with you and interact with you. You just have this beyond your years, sage advice, and the way you and Avital continue to motivate us to be better Jews, more learned Jews, and never to settle for where we are right now. How lucky we were to find you in Avital and to be inspired by you every day. Thank you.
Thank
you so much, Marty. Very well said. Cannot echo that sentiment of how welcoming Plainview is anymore. I absolutely 100% wholeheartedly agree. And on that note, I would like to tell a really quick story of one of the stories that sticks out in my head about Rabbi Weissman. We had only been living in Plainview for maybe 2 years at this point, and it was over Simchat Torah. And we had friends over who were here from Israel who just come to visit us and decided to walk over to the shul with us to be part of the celebrations. And of course, Rabbi Weissman was very full on in the celebration, in the simcha, and the chag, and saw these two strangers to the community and immediately broke off what he was doing, walked right over to our friends and introduced himself and was, are you new to the community? Do you live in Plainview? Or are you here just visiting? You know, welcome, welcome, welcome. And our friends were just so overwhelmed at how quickly he embraced them and how welcoming he was to these completely brand new faces and how he noticed them. And that is just such a sentiment of how involved and how wonderful Rabbi Weissman and the whole Weissman family is in bringing us all together and just creating such a tight community. And on that note, I would please everyone pay attention, and we bring you Rabbi Weissman.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Young Israel of Plainview. Thank you, David. Thank you, Marty. Thank you, Michelle. I am sitting in the building that Marty spoke so eloquently about. For those of you who have not yet been back here, we look forward to seeing you back here soon. The past is history, the future is a mystery, but today is a gift. That's why they call it the present. The problem, I think, for all of us right now is that it doesn't feel much like a gift. We are locked down at home, unable to live the life that we are used to living. We feel it here, just speaking for myself, but I think I speak for everyone. We feel it here acutely at shul. Our daily minyanim just returned, but it's modified, and so many of those who have invested so much into the spiritual quality of our shul are unable to be here. It hurts. So how shall we call it a gift? So allow me to focus your attention on a comment from Hillel in the 2nd chapter of Pirkei Avos. Hillel says, Al tifrosh min hatzibor, v'al ta'amin ba'atzmecha ad yom motcha, v'al tadin et chavercha ad shatagia limkomo, al tomar davar she'yeh efshar lishmoa shesofo v'hishama, v'al tomar letasha'efne eshne shema lo tipane. Don't cut yourself off from the congregation, he says. Don't trust yourself until the day you die. Don't judge your friend until you are in his place. Don't say something that shouldn't be said because someone will find out. And don't say finally that when I have time, someday I will learn. Perhaps you will never have time and you will never learn. Each of these statements, I believe, is focused on the present, on living in the moment. Don't cut yourself off from the congregation. Embrace those who are around you right now. Without thinking about, oh, remember who I used to hang out with, or looking around at who you are hanging out with and wondering who else you could possibly hang out around with. Also, he says, don't judge your friend, because that will lead you to think about what he's done or what he will be doing, rather than being there with him or her right at this moment. Don't trust yourself. Don't think that in 2 or 3 days from now, you will feel the same way you do now. And don't say something thinking that it will live in the here and now, because words have the potential and the power to move on. And finally, I think his most important statement, Al tumar kishe'efne eshne, don't say that when I have time, I will learn, because now is the time to accomplish. Now is the time to do. Today is a gift. It's a gift more than the past and more than the future, because today is available. It is here. In the past, it's nostalgia. It can be inspiring. It can be motivating. It can be brilliant. It can create love and caring. But it's either what was or what could have been. And the future, well, that is better left to others. We are, as I like to say, a not-for-profit. We can't tell the future, but what we can do is control the present. With all of today's limitations, we still have here as a community so much to celebrate. We are a growing community, a caring and sensitive group of friends that are able to forge relationships across the generations. People around us would literally risk their lives and risk all for one another. Today, for all of its obstacles, is nonetheless here for the taking. It's an opportunity. Enjoy the memories of the past, be inspired by them. Pray for a bright future, but don't ignore the opportunities of the present. There's so much that we have here in this Young Israel Plainview right today. So much to enjoy. Let's take the time to enjoy it right now. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Rabbi, for those wonderful, wise words. I know I am, and I'm sure we all are, just waiting and hoping for the day that we can all come back to shul as we used to. And now on to our future speaker, Michelle Hawk. She is what I consider the embodiment of just the future of the next generation. Comes from a wonderful family. She herself is just a bright, caring, wonderful young lady who is engaged to another Plainview family, and hopefully with all the Jewish guilt, we can get her to, them, to become another Plainview family when they are ready. Michelle.
I am honored to have been selected as the representative of the future. Initially raised outside of the community, I feel especially qualified to offer my insights on what makes the YIP community so exceptional and its promises for the future so certain. I very clearly remember the day that my parents told me I was moving to Plainview. A fourth grader at the time, I sobbed at the thought of leaving my friends and familiar school and moving to a new place. During Mincha on my first day of school at Hank, I watched a room of people speed through Ashrei, and I wondered to myself how I would ever catch up. I was holding a siddur that I could barely read, and I couldn't even process the words of Ashrei vibrating around me. When I graduated from Yeshiva University this past January, I reflected on that daunting day. I distinctly remember my very first job was at the Young Israel of Plainview. The children my age were hopping around in the courtyard playing games. I remember the kind woman who held my hand and introduced me to them. Those children are my friends to this day. The warmth and camaraderie with which my family was embraced with back in 2009 is a trademark of this community. One of the most significant events in establishing a future is marriage. When I moved here at just 11 years old, I never expected that I would be marrying a boy just across town. Now, we laugh at all the years we spent together without ever knowing what our future would hold. As we will become husband and wife in a few weeks, I take this opportunity on our behalf to thank you all, our community for shaping us into who we are today. We speak often about the principles which we hope to instill in our family, and many of the principles, including tzedakah, chesed, ahavat Israel, are deeply entrenched in this community. As tonight's representative of the future, I would be remiss in not thanking those who have built our foundations. We pray that our Bais Na'aman will provide nachas not only to our families, but to our community as well. Glimpsing toward the future is a concept with strong biblical precedent. We find a particularly telling instance in Bereshit Lamed Zayin, which presents a classic tale of forward thinking. Yosef was just 17 years old when he had his visions of greatness. A simple shepherd amongst his brothers, Yosef quickly became the favorite child of his father Yaakov. His brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, and therefore they hated him and could not engage with him peacefully. Famously, Yosef dreams about 12 sheaves of wheat, his in the center and 11 bowing down to him. His brothers understood the meaning of this dream, an indicator that he would rule over them. His second dream was of similar nature. The sun, moon, and 11 stars prostrated themselves to him. As Yosef dreamed about the future and shared his dreams with his brothers, their hatred toward him multiplied. He told the dream to his father, who rebuked him at the notion that he and his brothers will one day bow to him. Despite this, his father waited for the prophecy to become true. The 11 brothers returned to their pastor and plotted to kill Yosef. They concluded that it is not worth it to murder him and instead cast him into a pit. He was sold into slavery, a terrible hardship that was the beginning of a future of glory. It was precisely Yosef's seeming end that led him to the future he saw in his dreams. As we all well know, 2020 has been a year of immense hardship, and yet our community has shown its true colors, espousing infinite chesed and kindness both inside and outside the YIP community. From shopping for those who couldn't leave their houses, delivering food and sharing their books and plants, the unity and caring nature of our shul is the manifestation of the founders' aspirations for the small shul founded 50 years ago. These founders saw potential in a small town on an expansive map. Yosef too dreamed lofty goals despite external challenges. 50 years later, it is clear that the dream of building a successful shul and growing community has come true. The future of the young Israel of Plainview is bright and certain. In the decade that I have lived here, I have watched generations unfold. I have watched babies grow into children, children rising to the occasion of bar and bat mitzvah. I have attended many weddings and watched parents become grandparents and even great-grandparents. It is a blessing to watch our shul grow and expand. A once simple quorum of 10 men created a community that is vivacious and growth-oriented. Yosef dreamed of a future that seemed impossible. From the depths of a scorpion-filled pit, he rose to leadership. The dream of building a shul was equally as lofty. Yosef's dreams manifested into reality, and the dreams of our brave founders did too. 5 chapters later, when the 11 brothers approached Yosef in Egypt to purchase food, the pasuk states, "Vayizkor Yosef et hachalamo asher chalam lahem." Yosef remembered the dreams he had about them. The Abarbanel asks, why does the text say lahem, about them? His dreams were not about his brothers, but about himself. Abarbanel recontextualizes the pasuk. He explains as follows, lahem, the dreams that he had dreamt were for their sake. After his trials and tribulations in Egypt, he was able to understand that his dreams were not for himself, but for his brothers, who he will now sustain and reunite in Egypt. Looking at the many faces across my Zoom screen, it is clear that the dreams of the founders were not for themselves, but for us. We are the future that they had dreamed of. The risk, the effort, and the hard work was not for their sake, but for ours. 2020 has presented us with a year filled with uncertainty. However, of this, I am certain. A community built with a foundation of achdut, friendship, and chesed is one that is sure to endure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Well put. If you are a signature of the future, we are well preserved. Thank you so much to our speakers. And thank you so much for everyone who's attending. We are not done yet. We are going to break for Mincha Mariv. It will be streamed through Zoom. And after that, we invite you at 8:45 to rejoin us for our comedian, Ashley Blaker. So we are going to turn things over to Young Israel of Plainview, Mincha Mariv.
Thanks, Michelle. Rabbi, I'm going to unmute your, there you go.
Okay, we'll set it up. Yeah. We need a minute.
Rabbi, you need to unmute.